Hey everybody, welcome back for another Journey on the Fly, the podcast. Tonight I'm excited. We're going to be talking with a very good friend of mine, Mr. Jack Barr. Jack is a man of excellence. He's a committed husband and father. We're not going to get too much into his bio because we're going to do a whole nother podcast about Jack and his casting instruction, which we'll talk a little bit about tonight. But tonight, Jack is the founder of Raise the Bar Fly Fishing. He focuses a lot on steelhead, which is the topic tonight. It's winter. Some of us are out, some of us aren't. It just depends on the weather. Can we get there? Snowed a lot this year. But I thought we would do a couple podcasts and inform everybody on steelhead fishing. We're going to get a couple perspectives on it in the next couple weeks. Stick around. Remember, you can find us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, on our website, journeyonthefly.fish. We are a full-service fly fishing instruction guide service here in Pennsylvania, and we cover a lot of ground in PA. The three guides that work with me know various waters, and we're always exploring more. So we specialize in instruction. We want you to learn this sport, the fisheries, the fish, the bugs, the casting. We're always trying to educate ourselves and make ourselves better for you, the client. So if that's something of interest, please reach out to me now. Spring always fills up quickly, and we'd love to get you on board, on the calendar, and on the water. So let's get into this conversation with Mr. Jack Barr. Let's get at it. All right, Mr. Jack, let's talk about steelhead fishing. Got a few questions here for myself and for everybody, really. First question is, just tell us about these critters. Give us some of your knowledge on what you know about them and maybe their habitat.
So the steelhead being raised from smolts, their eggs are harvested at Trout Run, Godfrey Run in Erie, Pennsylvania. They are reared by the Pennsylvania Fish Commission to a certain size. Then a lot of them go into co-op hatcheries, such as 3CU and a couple other ones throughout Erie County, raised to what they call a smolt size, which is just usually below legal size limit of 6 to 7 inches, then released in the streams so that they can released in the streams early spring, very early spring, and as the water temperatures, they head out to the lake, and within 2 to 3 years they come back as mature fish, looking to go up into the creeks to spawn.
Let me throw another question in there about the smolt. How long does it typically take for them to get smolt size?
It can depend. Normally, the fish that you have now will be released in the spring. It depends on how much they're fed, their diet, things like that.
Okay.
There's a lot that goes into that, summertime temperatures and things like that. Whether you can feed them, whether you can't feed them, due to oxygen levels and different things. I don't know a lot of, some of the guys that work with the 3CU would know better, as to exactly how long it takes.
What about their habitat? Where do these critters seem to live most of their life, and where are we chasing them? What kind of water and such are we looking at?
So as a fisherman, they're targeted by charter boat captains out on the lake during the summer, as well as the steelhead fishermen, in the fall. They spend their summers in the deeper parts of Lake Erie in the cooler water, for the most part. Then as the temperatures of the lake and start to drop, they, start to migrate for their spawning run. They will bunch up on outside of tributaries, any tributary along the lake, little small creek, anything that's running water out into the lake, the fish will basically come into. And, as the water temperatures drop, it gets to where it needs to be, in the mid 60s, they'll start migrating up into the streams, and they will go as far as they can, depending on water levels, looking for that spawning ground.
And that's kind of it, I think. Everybody seems to ask the question, well, how far will these fish go? And there's different reports from different organizations and different people, but I think you kind of said it there, that they'll go as far as they need to, or as far as they can, therefore then as far as they need to, because they're looking for somewhere that's going to, hopefully they can put some eggs in there and make it happen.
Yes, if they don't hit a barrier, they can continue to go. So, most of the streams at some point have some type of barrier, whether it be a waterfall or just the water becomes too shallow, being that they are spate streams, meaning that they need rain to fill up. But they will go as far as they can.
So is there a season per se on these kinds of fish?
I like to describe steelhead season as 3 seasons within a season. The early fall, when the fish are staging outside of the tributary mouths, this is where you would target them by fishing from the beach, or, the deeper parts of tributaries towards the mouth. Usually low water, warmer water type scenario. Then that kind of changes with the first big cold rain that puts some water into the tributaries and moves the fish up into the tributaries. And depending on how long that high water lasts is how far they get. That becomes the second part of the season. And that's the late fall season. So late fall is all kind of a transition, waiting for that first rainfall. Then winter, which we're experiencing now, the really cold water, these fish will kind of just hunker down in the first deep hole they can find and stay there, kind of lethargic. They will still move upstream, on warmer days, but for the most part, they become dormant and, just kind of hang out, do their thing where they're at, their spawning ritual, where they're at. And then the third part of the season would be late winter after ice out and into the spring. After the spawn, you get a combination of some fresh run fish to come in later in the year, early spring fish we call them, and fallbacks, which are already spawned out, males and females, that are basically making their way back to the Great Lakes. I think as a fisherman, you have to focus on what season it is within the season.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I'm assuming then, without getting too ahead of myself, you're going to have some different tactics throughout those seasons.
Absolutely. The tactics, beach fishing, it's pretty simple fishing. I mean, the fly fishing part of it, mostly egg patterns, indicators, floated, just off the tributary mouths, along with stripping streamers at that time of year. Any kind of bait fish patterns work very well. The fish, if you think about it, they've just spent the last 2 to 3 years of their life eating nothing but bait fish. And with the water temperatures being okay, they're usually ready to eat. You have to keep in mind that at that time, a lot of those fish coming in are focused on simply spawning and not necessarily coming in to eat. There's been studies done that some of those fish can go a very long period of time without eating. The ones that do like to eat, they're pretty easy to catch that way. Getting into late fall and spring or fall, it basically about the same when they're in the tributaries. But once that water gets really cold, that's when you have to really look for the deep water. You have to look for the pockets and really start using baits to slow down. I mean, you have to get it right in front of their nose and entice them to bite. They're lethargic. You're going to be lethargic standing in that cold snow ice anyway, and they're not going to act any different. I will throw a tidbit out here. I do believe in the wintertime, bigger baits in the green water, such as jigs and bigger streamers and big egg patterns seem to be more productive. If the water is really low and clear in the middle of the winter, then very, very small patterns. So it can go from one extreme to the other on, what you want to fish on a particular day.
Interesting.
And then in the springtime, once they're spawned out and they start heading back and the fresh run fish come in, they're ready to put on some weight. They've lost a lot of weight. They haven't been eating. The water's warming up. They're getting their metabolism back, and they're pretty easy to. I'm not going to say easy, but they regularly bite in the spring. They're feisty fish in the spring.
And what do you mean by spring? Because that means different, especially to Erie. What? Because even an hour and a half north where I'm at, spring is different than it's almost a different world. Especially this year, it's a different world up there than it is where I'm at.
I call springtime anything after the winter blowouts. Just about every year, those tributaries freeze up. Have a lot of ice to them. Once the weather starts coming out of, let's say, February into March and starts warming up where you're not seeing those constantly freezing long periods of freezing temperatures, and that ice all melts, and you usually have like a flash flood of ice barges coming down the creek. And once that clears out and you get some, more steadily rising temperatures, from that point on, I would consider spring fishing.
Okay, that's good information.
And I have done well all the way up to May, the middle of May.
Wow. Okay.
So a lot of people think those fish are gone, but I mean, you can still have very, very good days in April into May as long as the water temperatures are there.
And into May, I suspect you're probably also have the potential for some other species at that point.
Absolutely. That's the fun thing about fishing the springtime. You have the fresh run steelhead coming in, you have the fallbacks. So the combination of those two, along with the enormous suckers that come into the creeks, which everybody thinks, oh, the suckers, I don't want to catch the suckers. Well, you put a 2-foot long sucker on the end of a fly rod, he's a good time. You can hit pods of them that just keep you busy all day.
Oh, man.
A lot of people don't like that, but I can honestly say that I have myself and some friends go up and we target the suckers in the springtime because they're that much fun. Along with the fact that you will get some lake run smallmouth that do commute up into the tributaries in the early spring, which, so I've had outings where we were catching steelhead, suckers, and smallmouth all the same day.
Oh, man.
And that's just fantastic fishing.
Yeah, you can't ask for much more than that. Now, are the smallmouth, they're running in there to spawn too, I suspect?
I believe so. Yeah. I just think the water temperatures will warm up in those tributaries a little faster than it does in the lake because they're shallower. They're going to get, warmer faster from the sunlight or whatever. Whether it's the temperature change or what it is that brings them in there, I've not done any, studies with data on that, but yeah, I believe they come into spawn early spring, and you have a real legitimate chance of catching a trophy smallmouth. I'm talking 3 to 6 pounds.
Wow. Well, here's a semi off topic. I don't think I've ever asked you this question. There's the river that's over in Ohio, and I keep forgetting the name of it, but there's this giant run of walleye.
The Milwaukee?
That's it. And I hear crazy stories about people 3 feet from each other casting. Do you have any idea why we don't see that in some of these tributaries? Because there's a lot of walleye. I mean, that's what Lake Erie seems to be really known for.
Yeah, that's a good question, Adam. I don't know if it just has to do with the depth of the river, the possible better spawning grounds. Our limestone slate streams are not adequate for fish spawning. There's very little gravel, very little pea gravel, very little sand other than a few smaller tributaries. And from my understanding, the Mwami's a pretty large tributary, and I just think it has to do with more of the size and the substrate of the river itself.
All right. I mean, that makes sense. Because I mean, we both stare at Facebook pages about steelhead and stuff, and I don't think I've ever seen anybody hold a walleye up. I mean, different types of salmon that either are leftovers or somehow find their way through some kind of crazy tributary from another lake to ours, but I don't think I've ever seen people in steelhead season. I mean, I guess typically walleye is a spring run fish anyways. It's when people target them on the shorelines of some places, but
yeah, they can be targeted outside some of the tributary mouths along Lake Erie in early spring. A lot of guys that'll be out there casting, 6-7 inch stick baits from the beach, and if you hit it right night, you can have a limit of walleye.
Oh man, now I'm just getting hungry. Well, you mentioned fly fishing a couple of times, and this is obviously a fly fishing podcast. What kind of gear are we looking at? What kind of recommendations you have? You out there with like a one weight with 7X tippet or something like that?
Absolutely not. My beliefs in the gear for steelhead fishing, everybody has their own thing. You only need a 9-foot 6 weight. You only need a 9-foot 5 weight. You only need this. You only need that. But myself, for my own personal fishing and my guiding, the most trusted setup that I believe in is a 10-foot 7 weight light tipped fly rod with weight forward floating line. I mean, that and a good reel with a good drag system, a good sealed drag system. Do you have to have the most expensive? No. Do you have to have the cheapest? No. But that extra foot of rod length will really help you with your line control and your mends. As long as, and that's what you need to catch the steelhead is good line control and good drifts. And that extra foot of rod really helps there. I think going lighter, guys, you don't need that heavy of a rod for a steelhead. No. But I think, with the warmer temperatures we've had over the last few years and, people playing the fish too long, and I just think it's a more adequate size of equipment for the fish. I mean, every time you throw in there, you have the potential of catching a fish between, let's say, 4.5 to 10 to 12, and occasionally bigger than 12-pound fish. You need to have the gear for it. As far as leaders go, I am not a fan of tapered leaders. I'm a fan for steelhead fishing in itself, of using a leader material, chameleon, in the 12 to 15-pound range, about a 5-foot section of that to a swivel, and then 3 and 4X tippet below that swivel. I have never found conditions in Erie that I needed less than 4X. Over the years, I've listened to people, you need 4-pound test and you need 2-pound test to catch these fish because the water's clear. No, you need a better presentation to catch the fish. They're not line shy. They're people shy. So, a 10-foot, 7 weight forward floating line with a good tippet material, and that's really all you need to get after these fish.
That's good information. I want to throw this out there too, because what I've noticed from just watching people fish over the years is that when somebody goes there with what I will go ahead and say is inadequate equipment, what ends up happening, because a lot of times you're fishing around other people. Sometimes you're 10 feet, sometimes you're 20, 30, 40, or 100 feet, but you're usually, at least early season anyways, you're usually around people. Somebody goes up there with a 5 weight and they're not accustomed to fighting a fish on a 5-weight of this size and caliber, what ends up happening is that everybody downstream or upstream of them, sometimes 50 to 100 feet, are experiencing their fight. And now they're all pulling out of the water while you're fighting this fish, like crazy, when it ought to be something a little bit more backbone so that you can, like you said, for the fish's health, keep the fight a little bit kind of capped off there to, a few moments rather than, yards and yards and yards of water.
Yes. I mean, think of it this way. Be fair to yourself and the fish.
Yeah.
Why go undergunned? I mean, you have the opportunity of catching a fish of a lifetime. You really, really do. Let's just say you're steelhead fishing, and all of a sudden you find out you got a 25-inch brown trout on the end of your line, which, they're in there, and you have inadequate equipment for it. And you end up losing that fish because you didn't have what you need. So be fair to yourself. And like you mentioned, be fair to the fish. These fish are a resource that, there's a lot of work that goes into maintaining and making the steelhead fishing that we have in Pennsylvania possible. From raising those fish to the volunteers that go, and they're volunteers that go and raise and feed these fish, daily, and take care of them, to stocking them, to, it is not it's not just something that's given to you. And, to not protect the resource, you're kidding yourself if you don't think human beings could hurt it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because so many times we take a lot of things for granted, and steelhead fishing to me over the years has become, not just another fish to go after, but it's become, almost a privileged thing to do, because I don't participate in a lot of that at all. I mean, I do some around my house, but not the steelhead, with stalking and different things like that. But you're right. I mean, those fish never existed there before, right? I mean, from the very beginning, they were raised and put in there.
That's how they get there. They, and a lot of people look at it as just a put and take, but if you got, if more people would get involved in associations like the Pennsylvania Steelhead Association, the 3CU, who are the gentlemen who are raising these fish for you, and go to some of their meetings and get a real understanding of what it takes for that fishery to remain there and the access for you to fish. I think a lot of people would have a different outlook on respecting the resource. There's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into maintaining that. And, I've seen some things happen over the last year or so that, it's going to make changes, and people just don't get that.
That's good information. And I'll make sure, along with a way to access you, that those organizations they have links that they can go check them out, whether they have Facebook pages or websites in the podcast, in the show notes and stuff like that, because it is important, even if it's just to be member of some sort, so that you're giving at least part of your resources, open your wallet a little bit, to help organizations that are actually doing something.
The steelhead are a fine example of that. I mean, those fish are, yes, the fish commission comes in and takes the fish out. They get the eggs, they get the spawning, they do all that. They, purchase the easements for you to be able to fish. But most of those fish are raised by private nonprofit organizations within Erie County, not the fish commission. And, it's a lot of man hours. It's a lot of cost per feed, for the fish. It's just a lot of work. And, supporting those groups can go a long, long way in maintaining what we have.
Man, I really appreciate you again bringing that up. That's really important. So I haven't taken the bait yet, no pun intended, when you talked about drifts. I want to talk about flies first, And then I want to get to something that I know you're passionate about, is making some casts and drifts and what that may or may not entail in the fly fishing world. So what kind of flies? I worked at a fly shop, as you know, for a couple years, and every time steelhead season come around, that people would come in just raging about a particular color of an egg, or do you have this or do you have that, because that's what's going to catch the fish. Before we get to addressing that issue, what kind of things make you recommend that people have in their fly box?
Definitely egg patterns of different sizes and in different colors. Me personally, I like a looped egg pattern. You could look that up. There's many different ways of tying it, rather than a glow egg that is round and cut to be round, where you're looping the yarn onto the hook. But color wise, you want an egg color. You want a pink color. You want a chartreuse, a bright orange and chartreuse for the darker water days. Water conditions dictate the size of your fly. If you got some higher water conditions and higher flows, and you're going to throw a size 16 egg pattern in there, that's not, not that the fish can't find it, because they find very small things, but you're going to, these being rainbow trout, which is what they really are, they like flashy, bright things. They grab it. So you need small ones for when the flows are down and the water's clear, and you need some bigger ones for when the water's up and colored. So egg patterns would definitely be one. Without a doubt, streamer patterns, zonker type patterns, woolly buggers, especially early fall. Kind of getting away from them going into winter, because now you got to dead drift them. Although they can be dead drifted, a lot of times the egg patterns work just as well, or minnow imitations of flies. And then getting into spring, they'll be hot for just about anything.
All right.
But you don't have to get fancy with your egg patterns. If you have a good selection of eggs, a good selection of some streamers, and a good selection of stonefly nymphs, bigger ones, like I'm talking size 10, size 8, size 12, stonefly nymph patterns, you can be successful on the tributaries.
Well, that's good, because that's always a big stressor for people that I've talked to, people that I brought out, is just, I just don't know what to pick, and we make it too complicated. I've done that. I've walked out on streams with way too many different flies, and just picking a fly most of the time, at least for steelhead, it sounds like, just shouldn't be the thing you're stressed about.
There are some days where they want a particular thing, and sometimes trial and error, of going through, okay, there's a pink egg, it didn't work, let's try a green egg, that didn't work, let's try an orange egg, and all of a sudden you start catching fish. That you will have those days. There'll be days where they want more of a minnow pattern, a zonker type fly, than they want the egg pattern. So, fishing tandems, whether, with an egg pattern on top of a zonker is, a traditional, very effective fly patterns to use.
Okay. So I have heard so many times that steelhead fishing in particular, many times, because the same people say this are the same ones that just came from Lake Ontario fishing for king salmon, that your casting is just chuck and duck and you hope for the best. What about casting when it comes to these critters and line control and all that?
As a guide, I can honestly say, after having hundreds of people on the streams with me, casting is probably one of the most overlooked things that we could do to make our fishing better. So, learning to be a good roll caster goes a long way in the tribs. But, guys, you don't have to overhand cast. Well, you know what? There's a lot of times where I'm positioned in the creek where I can overhead cast, where I'm, casting upstream or casting downstream. Being able to control that line. I watch so many people that struggle to put their line out, and it takes 4, 5, 6 casts. So you walk up to the stream. There's a pot of a dozen fish out in front of you, and it takes you 5 casts to get a good drift. You already spooked them all. You've already let them know you're there. You already let them know something isn't right. They're on alert. These fish particularly, I've seen fish in the tail out where people make 3, 4, 5 casts and they all move right up to the head of the pool. And then people move up to the head of the pool, make 2, 3, 4 more bad casts, and they all move to the back of the pool. Being able to put your fly where it needs to be is a very, very important part of steelhead fishing. It will go a long way over picking a fly pattern or anything else, the size tip that you have, anything. Being able to present the first part of your presentation is your cast. So, being able to cast makes a big difference. And when it takes me half a day to get you to be able to as a guide, it takes half a day to get you to where you're making that cast to get a good grip. That was half a day we could have been catching fish.
That's a good point. And I'll say this to be fair and very, very biased, not just because you're my friend, but and a fellow guide, but at the very least, if you end up in that scenario with Jack or anybody for that matter, at least you walk, well, let me put it this way. Anybody that understands that this is an important subject, at least you walk away with half a day of learning to cast and present the fly.
Yeah. But we live in a world, as a good friend of mine says all the time, one of my mentors, and, I just think the world of the gentleman, I've learned so much from him over the years. We all put the goal before the process. The goal of catching the fish, that is the only, man, we're going there to catch a fish. That's what we're going to do. And then you get there and find out you're not doing so good because your casting's not up to par or your line control's not up to par. And you end up spooking the fish more than you're catching the fish. So, we as people you have to have the process in front of the goal. If you do it in that order, you will be amazed at how much your fishing will improve.
I absolutely love that. That's kind of one of the things that I guess it's a humbling thing. I think it's a hard thing, especially for men to understand, because you got the folks that'll say, well, I can go catch fish. And understanding what you just said right there, your fishing, I think the overall experience is going to be better, period, because you're going to be more satisfied making that first cast well, rather than 10 or 15 and, like you said, spook the fish. But also your fishing, you're going to increase your ability and thereby your catch rate, most likely, by better casting.
Along with lessen the frustration of what you're doing. I mean,
yeah.
You're on that creek and, boy, you're just not catching any fish and you're tangled up and the line's around the end of your rod. And, you're trying to cast 2 flies and they're tangled up and, and you just don't have any control of what you're doing. Or, let's just say even 50% of the time don't have control of what you're doing. That's not to me, that's not a very fun day of fishing if I'm just untangling line. So, learning to be efficient with the rod and the presentations that you're trying to make. I mean, I can't explain to you how much it does for your fishing in itself. And I say this because I went through that. I'm talking about my life steps as a fisherman. I started out not knowing anything, trial and error, I'll figure it out on my own. I fly fished, and I did well for, years. And then I started getting some mentorship, going towards my casting certification. And I tell you, when you get around somebody that really knows what they're doing and you start learning that, you'll be amazed at what it does for your fishing. It just truly does. I think it's the first step.
I'll let everybody know we're going to have Jack back on, that we can talk a little bit more about who Jack Barr is and where he come from, his journey into fishing and fly fishing, and in particular because Jack is a casting instructor at heart, I would say is a good way to put it. Not only, but definitely at heart. His passion for it, his expertise at it. I've learned so much in the few times that we've done some casting around each other, but in particular, just because he articulates it, in my opinion, so well, I'm able to take what he says, and even though he doesn't know I do it, I go home and I practice those things. I look for the things that Jack's talked about. So we're going to do a whole entire discussion on that in particular, because I think it's important, and Jack can actually put the meat behind all that we're talking about when it comes to casting. So I have two more questions about steelhead fishing. One of them's kind of open-ended, but this next one is kind of general. You talked about the substrate. You mentioned that we're dealing primarily with shale river bottoms or shale creek bottoms. We're dealing with basically bedrock for the most part. And we're in not normal fly fishing conditions for most people. We're in colder weather and stuff. What are some safety protocols that people should think about when they're approaching the tributaries and such?
Being a steelhead fisherman, you have to take in a lot of safety things. The first thing comes to mind is the ice and the snow and the things like that. But just take a frosty morning on a beaten, muddy trail. And, you walk in and everything's, crisp and the ground's crunching underneath of you. And then the sun comes out midday. And when you're walking out, it's like 1.5 inches of mud, so just walking through that can be, a hazard. Wading can be a hazard, especially in these Erie tributaries. We have, the slate shale, there are steep, just drop off cuts through those shale. And it's slippery as can be, so, good studded boots are a thing, good clothing, don't stand in the water till your toes turn purple, get yourself out, get warmed up, walk up and down the bank, do some jumping jacks, whatever you got to do on the side. I was just recently on a guided trip with some gentlemen, and they were pretty diehard standing in that water. And, me being the guide, not fishing, more coaching. And, a couple of times I was like, hey, buddy, I'm going to be right over there. If you catch a fish, I'll be right behind you with the net, but I got to go walk. And, and I did that. Those kind of precautions. Be prepared for the weather. Be prepared for the tributaries. Use a wading staff whenever you're wading in that cold water. Stay away from the cottons. That's a given. Don't be afraid to bundle up in that cold weather. Some other ones, barbless hooks, throwing these big old clunky rigs that we're throwing for these steelhead, sometimes can get away from you. And if you end up with a hook in you, you're going to wish it was barbless, so common sense will make you a genius. So, planning out the conditions, looking at the weather, looking at the flow charts, knowing what you're going to get into, and be prepared for that. And, I tell clients of mine all the time, they say, well, what do I bring? I tell them a complete change of clothes. I'm talking socks, underwear, T-shirt, everything that you could have to stay warm, put in a bag and bring it extra. If you happen to fall in, you're going to need it. So, prepare yourself.
That's important. And man, I appreciate that, because I have fallen not up there, but we're all going to do it eventually. I just happen to be more frequent with it than probably most in October before. And when you make the first dunk, you get back up, you're like, you're okay because you're fishing. And then about 30 seconds later, you realize your waders are filled and your clothing is soaked with pretty darn cold water.
Yeah, the initial take your breath away shock of the cold water. And that can happen even in, late fall. The water's cold. So, and it only gets more dangerous as the year goes by. You're going to be winter fishing. so many people go up and break shelf ice and clear a hole out so that they can fish. And, you have to take in mind, there may be another fisherman right around the bend from you. So you constantly have to be watching upstream to make sure that a piece of shelf ice didn't break loose and come down and cut your legs off at the knee.
Yep.
I mean, there's hazards. I just, if it seems like something you shouldn't be doing, you probably shouldn't.
Really important. I know I saved kind of the safety question for last, and anybody that's been part of an organization that has safety meetings, it's always the fun joke to say safety last. But I did that on purpose because winding down, I really wanted the people to hear that, towards the end of the conversation, because I know it's just, safety is first. You want to come home to your family and be healthy after catching the fish, not put your life on the line for these things. So,
yes, typical, the typical fly fishing type safety thing is, start at your head, put a hat on. Next thing down, your eyes. Always wear a pair of glasses. I know people that don't wear glasses, but will wear clear glasses on, days that aren't cloudy or whatever. Just always protect your eyes. Have adequate clothing on for the temperatures that you're going to be in. Have extra clothing if you need it. Watch where you're walking. Watch what's above you. Watch what's coming down the stream. Those are all things that you need to do that you should be doing anytime you're fishing.
Now everybody can understand why I consider you one of my mentors in this sport. Whether you know it or not, it's.
I appreciate that. That's kind of something, Adam.
Well, it's the truth. I wouldn't say it if it wasn't. So,
I appreciate it.
Final question. And I'll phrase it two ways. If you had, I'll just phrase it one way. If you had, 5 minutes to introduce somebody, and you to one, maybe not even introduce. If they said, Jack, I'm going steelhead fishing, but I got to be at dinner with my wife in 5 minutes. What are some things that you would primarily or really importantly just put out there?
Learn to control your line. Get a good drift. When I say a good drift, a good dead drift, that can be achieved several different ways, depending on what technique you're using at the time. Secondly, don't overcomplicate steelhead fishing. I mean, you could go on YouTube, you need this, you need that, you need this fly, no, you just need the basics. The fundamental things, the egg pattern, the stone fly, the streamer, a couple of each, you're in the game. So just do what you need to do to be in the game. Most people along those streams are all doing the same exact thing because they're effective. So I'd point out that. By all means, when you get that big one on your line, take your time. Biggest thing in land to fish, never point your rod at the fish. Always keep that rod tip bent inside pressure. And if you do those things, you make a cast, you make a drift, you're going to get the bite. You keep that rod tip bent, you'll land that fish.
Love it. Well, Mr. Barr, I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to sit down and chat with me about this. I know that people are going to definitely learn a lot once this podcast goes live. So I look forward to, and everybody listening ought to, very shortly, probably in the month of February, Jack and I are going to sit down and talk about casting and line control and all of that specifically, because it is absolutely imperative. And I want people to know that they can access you for casting, instructing, and all those kinds of things as well, because I tell everybody that wants to further their sport, they absolutely have to do that. It's just not an option. You said it earlier, and I kind of want to touch on this real quick before we roll this out. You said that from one of your mentors, they say too many people get the catch before the process. They want to catch the fish, and getting there, they just kind of seem to wing it. I think about that so much because I make so many metaphor and comparisons with golf and fly fishing, and I could just imagine walking out onto a golf course, and all you're concerned with is getting the ball in the hole, but you have no idea how to do so accurately because, man, oh man, you better have about 4 or 5 dozen balls with you, put it that way.
I say that, honestly, because I lived it myself. Once I, became educated and spent the time, and it was a long process. I mean, it wasn't just something, that came about in a day or two. But once you start getting a good understanding of what it is, and like a lot of people, and I don't mean to get off onto the casting thing, but a lot of people are like, well, that's just casting. No, let me explain this to you. That it all applies to fishing. Yeah. It all applies to fishing. And when you're in control, that's exactly what you are. You're in control. You're in control of where your fly lands. You're in control of your drift. And that's what's going to bring the success. There's some really great Euro nymphers out there. One of the local guys that's an awesome Euro nympher around here. Their accuracy, and they're able to put the fly where they need it to be, in what scene they need it to be. And that didn't come from just going out and trying to wing it. Too many people have this idea of, oh, well, I can get my line out 30, 40 feet and I catch fish. Well, yeah. Yeah. And I just leave that conversation at that. And then whenever they spend a day with you and they learn these things and they catch 30, 40 fish, and that doesn't happen all the time. I'm not saying that happens all the time, but when they see the fishing improve, they're like, wow. And that's all you needed to learn, so.
Love it.
Yeah. We get a, men especially, we get a little hard-headed that we got it all figured out. And then you get around somebody that really does have it figured out. You find out you might have a little learning to do.
That is the truth.
That's the truth. That is the truth.
Well, Mr. Barr, like I said earlier, I really, truly appreciate your time, my friend.
Absolutely, Adam. I can't thank you enough, my friend, for having me on your podcast. And, I truly appreciate the humbling comments that you've made. I wish you all the success with the rest of the year. Hey, and we're going to get together and go get at them ourselves here.
Absolutely. Wow, what a download of information. That is my very good friend, Mr. Jack Barr of Jack Barr Fly Fishing Guide Services and casting instructing. Don't forget that. We're going to have that conversation later. Jack, thank you again. And thank you for being my friend. I hope I'm not the guy that has to thank people because I make it difficult. Nevertheless, I appreciate it. Friends that you're out there listening, if you like this stuff, pass it on, share it out there, leave us some reviews so other people can find it. I love having these conversations. I learn something every single time. And yes, that's one of my little underlining reasons that I do this. Have a good night, guys. Enjoy this discussion. And remember, it isn't about the destination. It's the journey that makes us. So enjoy it. God bless.